Ted Nicolaou. Thank you for joining the LilyList Podcast. Been a fan for quite some time now, and really looking forward to chatting with you.
Hey, thanks, Curt. Yeah, be glad
Yeah.
to be here.
So I always start at the beginning. Where were you born? Where did you grow up?
I was born in Poughkeepsie, New York, where my dad was doing his psychiatric residency at a mental hospital there. And we were there for 5 years. And then when I was five, we moved to Dallas, Texas, where he set up his practice as a psychoanalyst and lived in apartments and then moved to the suburbs of Dallas, where I grew up and went to high school. And Dallas in the 50s and early 60s was so conservative and so we got to dress for dinner, got to blah, blah, blah. And my family was very conservative. And I kind of started running with a crowd that was more arty and musically inclined. And so I couldn't wait. Once I graduated from high school, I had to get out and went to the University of Texas in Austin, which was the hippie mecca of Texas at the time, and thought I was going to be a psychiatrist like my dad and started in pre-med and then kind of met a guy named Daniel Pearl who ended up being my buddy, and Daniel Pearl and I both kind of got drawn into the film department. And even though they told us we'd never work in the actual film industry, Daniel ended up being the cinematographer of Texas Chainsaw Massacre and then went on to doing great work in music videos with a number of stars. And I came out to LA and kind of pursued my filmmaking career.
But I'm wondering, you were young when you moved, and you said your family was relatively conservative, but you found this connection to a creative scene. Were there individuals that nudged you that way, or do you have people in your family, even if it's conservative, that tend more towards the creative?
Yeah, actually, my mother's brothers they all kind of grew up in San Antonio and Ohio. Ohio first and then moved to San Antonio where my dad's family was living. And her brothers were kind of wild boys and a couple of them were musicians. And so maybe that's in my genes somewhere, music, but for me it was like being part of the 60s and kind of latching on to bands like first the Beatles or first Bob Dylan. First it was Bob Dylan for me, and then the Beatles, and then Velvet Underground, and just being inspired by the music, starting bands in high school. Even before bands in high school, I was playing in coffee houses around Dallas. So there was something in the air in 1963 to 1970 that just lured you if you were kind of not interested in the conservative and traditional path in life, and it got me.
Yeah. Cool. And you mentioned that going into psychiatry or thinking you might go into psychiatry, but then getting into filmmaking. And I don't know, to me, what's your view or opinion? I think that those fields are really aligned, quite frankly. I think psychiatry, psychology, and filmmaking is kind of almost the same thing in two different formats.
Because really you're dealing with people that are all levels of kind of crazy in the film business, from producers to the film artists, and most especially actors. And you're juggling actors in the course of a production when things are getting difficult requires a lot of kind of psychological finessing. So although at the time I didn't realize it, I guess the idea, and I didn't get far enough into psychology classes or any of that to really know that much, but I sort of rejected Freud early on and kind of was more drawn to Carl Jung and
Mhm.
his ideas. And so yeah, I mean, it's all very related. And as a director, you're constantly trying to talk people off the edge of the cliff, really.
And even writing and directing, I was thinking, I mean, that's all narrative, it's all storytelling. And when you're talking about psychology or psychiatry, if somebody is having a difficult time or is manic, there's narratives that tend to drive that, right? Understanding them, identifying them, and helping somebody through them, right? It seems related to me in some way.
And really writing a story involves so much internal work on your part and internal work as you kind of figure out why the character does what he does. And as a director, the why is kind of the thing that you always have to know and always have to be able to answer for actors. And so not only are you dealing with this particular kind of psychology of the actual actor, but you're trying to impose to him and convey to him or her the way that the character is kind of seeing the world. So yeah, it's all about plumbing kind of people's motivations and people's actions and how they affect everything around them.
You mentioned Daniel Pearl, and it's crazy every time I hear that name, even though I've been a fan of Texas Chainsaw for a long time. I can't help but think of the journalist with the same name. But with Daniel, so you met in college. Did you end up completing a degree in filmmaking?
Yeah, Daniel and I were both in this program called Plan 2, which was kind of like the accelerated thing for freshmen. And we were taking classes together and kind of picked each other out of the crowd because he had long hair, I had long hair, and in those days, that was kind of a signifier of something that meant that they were part of your tribe or something. So we became really good friends very quickly. And once we transferred over to the film department, I finished my undergraduate and got a master's degree in film production as well.
Cool.
And then in the midst of all that, we ended up doing Texas Chainsaw Massacre. He was the cinematographer and I was the sound man, and that kind of gave us both our start in features.
Was there anything along the way as you worked through this? I mean, were there times where you thought maybe filmmaking isn't the right path? Maybe I should be looking into accounting. I mean, while you were in school, was there a support? Did you have a support kind of group that kept you kind of looking forward and moving forward, or was that difficult to like? I mean, you got your master's, so obviously you were driven to quite a good point to do it.
I was driven to create, and there was a point where I could have pursued music or gone on with film. And I had a band, and the band was really popular in Austin, but it was like it was the '60s, and one person be on acid, one person be on speed, one person be on downers, and the music never quite congealed. But once I chose filmmaking, my classmates in school were a really good support, and we worked on each other's films. And I didn't really doubt that I had the skill to get somewhere. Later on, when I was actually working here in Los Angeles, and the life of a freelancer is full of incredible periods of doubt and wondering if you're ever going to work again. And sometimes those dry spells would be so elongated that I would find myself fantasizing about people who go to work and go in elevators up to their offices and wishing I had that kind of stability. But I had no skills that would get me into those places. And so I just kept pushing. And I had kind of two skills. I could edit very well and I could direct and I could write. I guess that's three skills. So I figured between those skills, I could manage to keep working. And it took me a while to become a director. I was really editing for a number of years.
I know that I read or saw interviews with you in the past. You talked about Daniel getting you on to Texas Chainsaw. What was that journey like from completing your degree to getting into the industry to getting to a point where you were able to actually produce your own film?
It all seemed really natural. Austin was easy at the time, and back then, there were fewer people competing for the jobs, and Daniel and I and 3 other people had started a production company in Austin, I think a little before Chainsaw Massacre, and we were doing, like, industrial films and government contract kinda work, and so we had a means of kind of moving forward even though it was small scale in Austin. Once Toby Hooper proved that you could raise a certain amount of money in Texas and make a feature, then we kind of pursued that for a long time. But Toby worked at a time when there was an incredible tax break for individuals investing in films, and that kind of evaporated shortly after Chainsaw Massacre. So we couldn't really gain traction making movies in Austin at the time. And a lot of my friends from the University of Texas kind of started filtering out to Los Angeles. And they contacted me and said, "You should come here. It's like a lot of work." And there was a movie that my friend Courtney Gooden, who was a sound man, was working on called Roar, which is like one of the
Oh,
craziest movies ever made in the world. And at that time, even if you just got out of prison for killing somebody, you could get a job on Roar, and because it was such a dangerous and crazy set, and they were paying so little money. So I came out to LA and found myself editing on Roar. And so it was like the easiest transition because there was this kind of bed of LA friends that were already kind of breaking ground here.
I didn't know that you worked on Roar, and I can't say I've ever seen Roar, but I've seen enough, and I watched the documentary on Roar to know
That's the craziest thing
that
of
it was
all.
basically made by a psychopath using real large cats, lions, that were not trained. So, I mean, were you on set for that? I mean, with or I'm curious if you you were in any danger of being
A couple
attacked.
of the film was shot out in Soledad Canyon north of Los Angeles, and they had a compound, and on the compound were some motorhomes where Noel Marshall, the producer director, and his wife Tippi Hedren lived, and their kids lived. There was a little island in the middle of the stream bed that was dry at the time where they had a bunch of little trailers for the crew to live in. They had a big dining hall where, people that just got out of prison cooked our meals. And then they had offices and cages and stuff down the way. And they had their set, a little lake kind of built and a house on the set. And I worked mostly in the cutting room, so I was kind of free of danger for most days. But one day they needed a second sound recordist on set. And so Noel came into the cutting room, and he was a incredibly kind of psychically powerful man. He'd walk in the room, and because he could command lions with his voice, he could command human beings to kind of like be terrified of him. And he said, "Hey, you record sound, so come on, we need your help." And took me out to the set and basically said, "Okay, here's the Nagra. You sit on this stump." There was a chain link fence and all the lions and tigers, and there was like 100 lions on the film. And like you say, none of them trained. And so he gave me the Nagra and said, "Okay." And then gave me a cane, like one of those kind of crook-ended walking canes. Said, "If any lions come at you, just whack them in the face, right on the nose." I was like, "Okay, whatever." So then roll camera, okay, action. And the lions kind of came along the chain link fence, jumped in the water, swam around the fence, and suddenly were running free on the crew side of the ground. And all hell broke loose. And Noel was like screaming, cursing, and running all over the place. Came running to me, grabbed my cane, and went running off, kind of whacking lions. And in that moment, I just said, I will not return to this set ever. I'm not that crazy."
Yeah, I've been in a few strange situations in my life, but I can't say that anything would come close to that. So,
Yeah,
uh,
it was an experience. And then a flood came and wiped everything
yeah.
downriver, and that was, like, just another disaster to overcome.
What was your experience like? How did you navigate that scene?
Mhm. Grown better at it over the years, but at the time, I was sorta, like, confident in my own kind of craft and abilities, and from Roar, got hired onto another movie called Tourist Trap, which was kind of another kinda cult classic horror film. And the producer of that film was Charles Band, who was sort of like after Roger Corman came Charles Band as like the low budget impresario and the guy who kind of invented the VHS market for home video. So I edited that film, Tourist Trap, and kind of caught Charlie Band's eye as an editor and So then he hired me to fix a movie that he had that the director and editor had walked off on. And then I kinda went off, and in those days, you could kind of find a job in the independent film world, and I never joined the union, which I should have, that was a big mistake, but I was able to work non-union gigs and kind of we would my wife and I would work a job and save up, who knows, like $12,000 or something and go, "Oh, man, we're rich." And then kinda look for work until it was down to about $300, and so I kind of moved from film to film, 1 or 2 films a year in that way, and living was a lot cheaper back then. So and the people that I dealt with in the independent film world, because I wasn't directing at the time, so I was basically an employee and did a job that not that many people understand kinda how to do, especially when it was 35 millimeter film. People left you alone because it was such a laborious process. Now with editing digitally, everybody can stick their fingers into the thing and kinda, make a cut without any problem. Back in those days, if you wanted to generate a different cut of the movie, it required reprinting the work picture. It was a big hassle. I was aware of the grotesquerie of Hollywood, but I'm also very stuff like that kinda rolls off my back in a way. So it didn't really upset me, and I just wanted to make movies because I loved the process so much. So no, I ended up doing a lot of movies for Charlie Band, and he was sort of a he was great because he loved making movies, he had access to money, and he was not an asshole. He was a bit of a con artist and sometimes didn't pay you, but he was a good guy to work with.
I'll say how I learned of you and your work, of course, is a Subspecies series.
Mhm.
And so at some point you did transition from I mean, I guess we're all employees to some extent to somebody, but you transitioned from being kind of the individual contributor to writing, directing, I'm assuming having to raise money for producing your own films. I could be wrong on that if I am, just correct me, but what was that transition like? I mean, did you feel like you seem to always wanna create, and did you feel like you got to a point where you'd seen enough and understood enough where you wanted to take that next step, or was it more something you always wanted to do it and there was just a certain point where something presented itself that you wanted to take advantage of?
I studied in film school to be a director and directed a film that got, like, a Student Academy Award nomination. So it was always in my head to direct. Second best for me in terms of contribution to the film, the overall kind of creative direction of filmmaking to me is editing, and so I enjoyed the editing process, made money as an editor, caught Charles Band's attention as an editor. He was making so many movies at the time that he would just put me one movie to another, and it was like heaven because he's easy to work for, he is not an asshole, and I was able to work and do the thing I love. At a certain point, he was testing other directors for this grand plan that he had to kind of expand the company and make 10 or 12 movies a year, and I was looking at the work that these directors were doing, and I finally said to him, "Look, hey, Charlie, I wanna my goal is to direct, and I would love an opportunity to do that." And so I directed a little short segment of one of these movies where he had other directors working, and he liked it and gave me my first film to direct, and it was a thing called TerrorVision, which was,
Oh, yeah.
like a comedy absurdist comedy monster movie, satire of the 1980s, and that movie was shot in Rome, where he had bought a studio, and cast with some brilliant kind of semi-movie stars of the time, and I love that movie, and it's grown to be kind of a cult fan favorite, but it was reviled at the time that it first came out, and critics hated it and didn't if you didn't get it, you hated it, and then there was a certain brand of hipsters that kinda that got it and liked it, and it really hurt me for, like, a year, the kinda critical reception of this film, because no matter whether a film's good or bad, it's like you put a lot of your life into it. So, that took about a year to recuperate from that, and over the years, that movie kinda because it was so difficult to find and kids would turn their friends onto it, and it's a good film for late night watching, or if you get stoned watching, or if you're drunk watching. And so it kind of, over the years, gained a gigantic following. So that movie set me off. Then I was in director hell for a couple of years trying to develop another project, but I was always getting paid by Charlie Band because he was interested in kind of in me as a growing friendship and also as a director that he could count on to kind of bring things in on budget and with some amount of style. And so the next step kind of was Subspecies. He came in those days. He basically would come up with a poster, sell the poster, sell international rights to the poster, and then go, okay, here's the poster, come up with a movie for it. And the first Subspecies I did not write. It was written by somebody, but the idea on that one was a Romanian expat who was living in the United States after Ceausescu fell and business was opened in Romania. He came to Charlie and said, "Hey, we could do a co-production. Romania will pay for all the Romania costs and you pay for the American costs." And for Charlie, that's like the ultimate thing at the time, like make a movie for almost no money. So he sent me over to Romania for a week to see if I thought it was possible. And Romania at the time was more kind of grim and desperate and poverty stricken than you can imagine the way but I went over there and saw the locations that we'd be able to shoot in and met the cinematographer Vlad Paunescu and his girlfriend, now wife, Juana Tofan, who is a brilliant costume designer, and hit it off with them, even though he couldn't speak English and she spoke broken English, but was somehow able to communicate between us. So I went back to Charlie and said, yeah, we can make this movie and it'll be amazing. It'll be difficult and it'll be kind of European looking because their equipment is old, just very rundown equipment from their film studio. So so I did the Subspecies film. Paramount Home Video, which released it, loved it and wanted more sequels. So, you know what? I never had to raise money. It was always there. Charlie Band took care of the money. And the only drawback was you didn't get paid very much. You didn't have a gigantic schedule. The budget was very tight, but you had to find a way to kind of make it as cool looking as it could be given those parameters. And so I loved that Anna Sove, who plays Radu, became a really great friend. And we just kept going and adventuring in Romania and then made some kids movies in Romania. And Charlie eventually bought the studio there and then lost the studio, as he tends to do, can like kind of build these kingdoms and then lose them in financial disarray. And so it's not really until about 2000 that his company kind of fell apart and I was left without work, and then kind of decided, okay, I'll just go back to editing again. And now editing had changed from 35 millimeter to digital, taught myself how to use the Avid. I have a friend whose company produced like bonus features and documentaries for Disney, and went to work for her and spent the next 20 years doing little documentaries and producing and directing little short things for Disney. And in that course of time, kind of went, okay, I'm getting sick of doing these things for Disney. When COVID hit, I just went, okay, that's it for that part of my life. Now I'm going to go back to writing again and trying to get a movie off the ground. Now I'm in a situation of having to raise money, and that's really puzzling.
It's as you talked about the editing and the transition from film to digital, of course, I started out in the print industry in the '80s. When I started out film strippers, you'd take pictures of things, you'd strip them together and shoot a plate, and the plate would go on the press and it would get printed. That's how newspapers were made. But once Photoshop and Illustrator came out, like overnight, those guys were out of business. You no longer needed film anymore, or if you did, the film came out directly off a computer layout and went straight to the film machine. So I'm guessing Just like music studios, I've still got some 2-inch tape from albums we put out in the '90s. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, you sorta have to keep up with the times, and now it's like, okay, I managed the switch from kinda analog filmmaking to digital filmmaking, and I'm real comfortable with digital editing, and now the next challenge is AI, and how to utilize that or totally not use it at all is like the giant question mark. Because for me, I prefer human beings and human interactions and writing from my soul instead of like some soulless machine. So I can see its use in kind of creating artistic backgrounds and things like that that people have been doing on with computer generated images. But yeah, that still remains to be seen how that's going to shake things up and end up taking more jobs away.
I've been working with AI since 2016, but that's a follow-up conversation for you and I instead of
Okay.
so, one of the things I wanna say, I don't know where it came from, if it's a personality trait of yours or you just got lucky with the team you had for the Subspecies series, but as I mentioned when we booked this, my wife and I just watched, I was gonna say all 5, but actually all 6, including Vampire Journal and then
Wow.
but one of the things I'll say is that when people hear the term, say, low budget filmmaking, it carries a certain connotation with it. And I don't want to compare Subspecies with, say, I forget what the hell the movie was called, the Anne Rice vampire Lestat thing.
Oh, right.
And I don't want to compare those for 2 reasons. One, I don't like Anne Rice nor that movie. And 2, that budget is so far above what you were working with. Well, one
Yeah.
thing I said to my wife was that all of the Subspecies movies were very consistent because I grew up Hellraiser 1 and 2 were some of my favorite movies when I was
Wow.
younger.
Yeah.
I just learned there's 9 Hellraisers. I had no idea that there was more than 4, and those things are a mess from one movie to the next, different writers, different producers, some of them look okay, some look like crap. The writing in some is I don't know how well can you say the Hellraiser writing is, but it was good. To me, aesthetically was good, but then there's other ones where the writing is just terrible. It's just not good. But the subspecies all across the board, both in look, tone, the writing, they're remarkably consistent from one movie to the next. Was that all your direction? Was there some luck with the team you had for those movies?
I feel like my job as a director is really to create a consistent tone in a movie and kind of watch over the performances of the cast to make sure that they're all fitting into that plan. And yet the subspecies films are really they're like magic happens sometimes where the cast is great, and we got so lucky with Anders Hove, the Danish actor who plays Radu. Laura Tate, who was Michelle in the first film, was, I thought, a really good find, and then for a lot of reasons, she couldn't carry on to do 2 and 3, and then we found Denise Duff, who ended up being even better in my mind for the movie. And it was the casting, if you do it right and you kind of eliminate the bad seeds, and there were some bad seeds in the first subspecies film that kind of I couldn't bring on to the second one because it was just it's not worth working with an actor when you dread going to the set every day. It's like you have to have a I like to have a really good positive feeling on the set and where everybody is free to create and do their best work. And that's my job too, is to kind of inspire every department to kind of here's what I'd like to see. And the subspecies films were so blessed by the team. The casts were great. The director of photography, Vlad Paunescu, was really an artist. The costumes that Juana made were amazing. The makeup effects, they vary from film to film, and I think maybe 2 and 3 were kind of the best, Radu makeup and mummy makeup and all of that. Oh, and the locations. The locations were, they were half of the movie. The half of the ambience of the movie is from those locations. So I was really lucky directing the films and doing them in Romania when things were so desperate there required a lot from me that went beyond what a director is supposed to do, and so it was like kind of setting in motion this out of control locomotive and then just kinda hanging on and trying to manage it to the end, and the first one was so difficult, and then I came home and all the bad memories kind of fade, and the moments of pleasure and the moments of working with people that you really respect kind of remain. When the opportunity to do sequels came up, I was, like, insistent on directing them and writing them and being able to kinda guide that story into kind of this bigger universe of vampire life. And the last one was shot not in Romania with a completely new team of creators in Serbia, and it looks a little bit different, and the castles aren't quite as great as the ones in Romania, but, yeah, I think the tone of the film and the feeling of it and Hannes's performance, which he was really worried because it'd been 20 years since he had played
Mhm.
Radu, and yet he worried about it a lot. We spent a lot of time kinda talking about the script and all of that. The minute he put on the makeup and the costume, and the first scene we shot was just like, bang, he was back. So it's magic and it's luck and it's knowing kinda what you're after and being able to express it to everybody on your crew to make the movie.
Yeah. And I mean, we as human beings, we are very good at eventually forgetting or minimizing the really bad parts and then really lifting up the good parts. That's what keeps us coming back.
It was amazing. Yes, it was really cool that.
Yeah. But to that end, what I wanted to do was when you do think back, so reflection's a big part of I left safety at a good paying job about a year and a half ago to chase after my own ideas for better and worse. Yeah. But the when you look back, and I know since Subspecies, we stuck on that a while because I was such a fan of it. But when you look back at your career or your work, obviously we've got these highs and these lows. And when I've done kind of leadership development in the past, you get down to the bottom, call it the pit of despair. And the one thing that we've always told people is you're not going to pull yourself out of that on your own. It always requires something else, some other force, other people, friends, family, whatever. When you look back, I mean, was there a time, beginning, middle, maybe recently, where you just felt like everything's going to shit and I don't know how I'm gonna get through this? And something, obviously, don't not asking you to share your deepest, darkest things here, but some time when things looked really bad, when you really weren't sure, and what was that like, and how did you get out of it? What were the was it a person or people? How did you kind of pull yourself out of that and then keep going forward?
Yeah, there were a lot of ups, and when you're making a movie, the high is just indescribable, the kind of camaraderie that you form with people. And then when you finish the movie, the quiet kind of bears down on you and the desire to kind of find that experience again. And so in between times, there have been times when like I said earlier, where I was like kind of sitting at home, not making money, envying people who had a job in an office and went to work in an elevator every day. And there were some times where it was even worse, where I felt like I was never going to work again. And the few, like Charlie Band's company had crashed and burned, and there was no, because I kind of made the mistake in my career of he kept offering me jobs and the travel to different locations and different countries to make movies and just enough money to make it worth it that we could eventually buy a house. And so I didn't really go out and say no to him and go out and try to kind of expand my world of contacts. And that was a big mistake. And I paid for that later on. And but the what rescued me basically from despair is I'm not really a depressive person because I always kind of like a intuitive kind of person who kind of forgets the past pretty quickly and is always thinking and imagining what can be in the future and what I could just write another script and I'll make it. And even though I might write another script, it goes nowhere. And my wife is a very down to earth person and she's not sympathetic all that much when I get depressed. And so she sort of forces me to kinda go out and live my life, and so she's really good for me, and then yeah, the friends that I had that kind of like went, "Oh, hey, you can come work at our company," and then I was able to prove that I had worth beyond kind of what I had been doing in the low budget filmmaking world, and then ended up doing some really wonderful work for them. I have had periods of despair, but knock on wood, not as many as maybe should have had, given the ridiculousness of my journey.
Yeah. And the flip side of that, as far as positive, I mean, we talked about all kind of the camaraderie and everything else, but is there a specific moment that you can recall where something happened or maybe you achieved something you worked really hard on, but is there a specific moment where you it doesn't have to be the most money you made or anything like that, but something where you feel like, man, that kind of made it all worth it.
You know what? Every time you finish a movie and you screen it for people, I think you have that experience that, "Oh, that was worth it." But I think the pinnacle of all of that for me was a movie called Dragon World, this kids
Mhm.
movie that I did that was making a horror movie is one thing, and you find joy in kind of blood and figuring out new ways to do mayhem to people, and it's fun, and the creating the dark atmosphere, but I have sort of this Walt Disney kind of thing in my brain because I grew up with Walt Disney, that even a kids movie needs darkness, and the villain of a kids movie has to really be something evil, and so even my kids movies are kind of fantasy kids movies, but when I finished Dragon World, and it's got its flaws of the movie because everything is budget kind of ruins everything, but it was so uplifting to be able to watch it with people and know that that was going to be a movie that kids would love. So your question was basically any moment of like, okay, this is wonderful. I never felt like, oh boy, I've made it
Yeah.
because it's this endless kind of like you finish one thing and then you're like despairing that you might not ever get to do it again. So
Mhm.
you're always kind of on edge, but each kind of accomplishment is a wonderful thing. And then I got to like curate this exhibition at the Walt Disney Family Museum
Cool.
about the friendship between Walt Disney and Salvador Dali. And that was like kind of the culmination of two influences from my like teenage years. Walt Disney I grew up with, and so my imagination is partly formed by how Peter Pan could fly over London, and Dali I discovered more in the psychedelic days of the university, and to be able to curate an exhibition that kind of brought me to Spain and to Florida, where Dali's museum is here in the States. And for me, that was like, wow, I'm not just a filmmaker. I now can tell a story kind of in a totally other medium. So for me, that was like another proof of that I sort of earned my chops, I guess.
Yeah. And you mentioned so if we think about where you are now, you mentioned having to think about fundraising now. Are you working on some new projects now, and are you trying to raise money? Is there I'm not asking you to share anything you don't want, but kind of what's your focus over the next year or 2 that you're working on?
Since COVID, I kind of sat down and I wrote screenplays and designed kind of picture books that would kind of express the stories. And so now I'm sitting on like two kind of supernatural shocker movies and one film that's sort of like the film of my dreams that I would love to do. That's like a spiritual road trip comedy that I'm hoping we could raise the money for. And I've got people I don't have that many contacts because beyond Charlie Band and a few fans who admire my work and what and so trying to raise money is difficult, but I've got these 3 screenplays that I'm really dying to bring out in the world and be able to direct another couple of movies before it's all over.
Right, so I think about the whole arc from the start to the finish, right? Again, going back to narrative, and so when you think about kind of the time you have left, and you're older than I am, but you look like you're probably in better health than I am. It's still active, and I know you were helping your wife in the garden earlier in the week, and so You've still got life left, but other than your projects, are there things that you want to focus on or put time on while you still have the time and the energy to do so?
Yeah, I mean, for some reason, I'm so obsessed with making movies. That's kinda like if I have a day to spend, I'll sit here and try to think of how to improve a screenplay or like so I'm a little bit too obsessed with that, and but I try to enjoy my life. I take walks, I can do stuff with my wife. We wanna travel more, and it's hard to travel on your own dime when you travel on the production's money
Yeah,
most of your life, and I spent so much time away from home in the '90s and so much time driving to Burbank every day in the 2000s that very happy to just be here. My house is really nice and modest, but beautiful, and we live on the west side of Los Angeles where the weather is nice. But yeah, I wanna be able to travel more, enjoy our life more, and because I know it's not gonna last forever. We got a son who's, like, almost 40, and my daughter's, like, 56.
mm,
So we get to see them some, and as long as the money holds out, we'll spend some time traveling too.
yeah, it's a welcome to America. It should be our motto, right? As long as the money holds out.
Social Security, let's hope it lasts, and Medicare.
Do you keep other than your work, do you keep journals and things for your kids
Oh,
or people close to you? Are there things you keep that mementos that can be passed down?
no, the only journal I ever kept was during the making of the first Subspecies because the experience was so unique, and I kick myself that I didn't have the, like, discipline to keep a journal throughout my life because it's an amazing way to kind of, if not make sense of your life, to see the kinda journalistic the kinda novelistic threads of people and events that kind of weave through your life. It's really, really illuminating, but I didn't do it.
Yeah. Well, I'm guessing I'm the 20 or 25 years younger than you, but I even now when I try to think back, there's so much that I've forgotten. I was the same. I was always on the go. I was always moving. I never wrote anything down. I never captured anything. And now I look back and even the memories I have, I'm like, I don't know if those are real or if I'm just making them up as I go. So,
Oh, that doesn't matter. Just make up the best version of everything.
yeah, I will say I've very much enjoyed your Substack posts that you've been doing around.
Oh, cool.
She's talked about one of the down moments. I haven't finished reading it. I started reading and I'm bad with remembering names, but started reading the one now where you were going to have to fire someone you were close with.
Oh, that was Jan, the director of photography. I didn't
Oh,
want to fire him. Charlie Band wanted to fire him, and I'm trying to fight for his survival. That movie was full of so many trials and tribulations. It's really hilarious to read.
yeah. So I appreciate you writing them down. I'm enjoying them. I try to, when I have a few minutes, pop over and read what I can.
Cool. Thank you.
So one of the things at the beginning I asked you about creativity, and you said maybe it's in my family, but the first Subspecies movies I watched was 93, 94. I reached out to you and connected with you, I think on LinkedIn, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and the reason for that was might have even been a bit before that, but I came across this band called Drab Majesty. Oh, yeah. So
That's
anyway, that was kind of my connection, and that's why I reached out, and I loved the 2 albums I bought from Drab. I still listen to. I haven't kept up with them because time gets tight, but I am glad, A, for their output, which shows the creativity that runs genetically through your family, but B, for the reminder to me to reach out and connect, and so
cool. Okay, that's
th
great, man. But yeah, hopefully they're recording a new album right now. They've been on hiatus too long, and they really need to go. They were touring the world for a while there, and it was really good for them. So
yep,
hopefully they're getting close to a new album. It's funny, I had aspirations to be a musician. He kind of took that further. My grandfather had aspirations to write Hollywood screenplays about the Greek gods and mythology, and my dad and his brothers all had 16 millimeter cameras that they documented family events with. So it kind of comes down through the family. It's amazing.
yeah. It's probably a vampire movie in there for you.
Yeah.
Thank you again for all your work, for your time, and for connecting.
It was really fun talking to you. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Bye.
Bye-bye.